all of which, to a degree at least, were available to Descartes. Also, we have another entire group of symbols, referred to, of course, originally in the Bible. The mystery of the eye single, the mystery of the all-seeing eye of the Masonic lodges, the mystery of the same all-seeing eye that is found frequently in the artistry of cathedrals and other religious edifices, sometimes placed within a triangle being basically, for one reason or another, used frequently to describe the shape of the third ventricle in the brain. This eye single is a mysterious kind of eye. We do not know just exactly what the Bible meant when it said, "If thine eye be single, thy body shall be filled with light." But it doesn't apparently mean that we should close one eye and expect illumination through the other one. Nor does it seem to imply that there is any ordinary organ of sight that is single. The only eye single we can conceive of is the one that Descartes found, because it is the only unpaired organ in the brain. It is single. It also is composed of exactly, or very nearly exactly, the same materials as the optic nerve. Therefore, that it is a potential eye. And in a few small forms of life, I could suggest perhaps that the gasteropodia is one of them, if that will help anyone, that in this particular, in these very primitive forms of life, there are still cyclops. There are still forms of life today that have one eye. And where they have that one eye, it is certainly and undeniably the eye which is now represented to us by the pineal gland. It is not the type of eye that we otherwise have. It is also present under a thin veil in certain forms of horned toads. And it is present in the central upper part of the skull, not where the ordinary eyes of the creature would be. That all such facts are available, and many others, might well cause us to pause and inquire concerning this eye single. We find it occurring again in the Scandinavian sacred writings, the story of Odin and his single eye, how in searching for truth he went to Mirma's pool at the bottom of the tree of life, and there the god of all memories of things told Odin that he would give him the gift of insight if he would pluck out one of his eyes and cast it into the pool of memory. And when Odin had only one eye, he was enlightened. And from that time on, when Allfather wandered the earth, concealed as a man, he always allowed a heavy lock of his hair to fall over one side of his face to cover the fact that he had only a single eye. This one-eyed god has been called the sun god, and many ancient people insist that the sun deity is always properly represented with one eye. In the Kabbalah of the Hebrews, the God of Israel, which neither slumbers nor sleeps, is always presented symbolically in profile, so that only one eye is visible. The same situation also falls into the deck of cards, which was an ancient symbol. And you will note that in the court cards, some are in profile and some in full face. This is by meaning or purpose, and not by accident. Thus we have enough lore and legendary to support Descartes' thinking, and to suggest that in his time, lore and legendary were probably the most common sources of information available to him, that he would naturally derive from the backgrounds of things known that which he desired to know. The pineal gland, then, does still carry to us, and even to scientific men, the simple possibility that it could be an eye. There is nothing to deny this possibility, that it is an eye which has retired into the brain, and the brain has closed around it, and the skull has closed over it, and its sight power has ceased. We might also come to the rather simple supposition that if this was a prehistoric or a primogenital eye belonging to some actually ancient and remote period and having no further use for man because his other eyes are so excellent and efficient, that this gland would atrophy. That which is no longer needed or useful to man seldom remains. But this gland does not do this. This gland remains in some way perfectly healthy down through time, although we don't use it. Its other services to mankind are sketchy, still the cause of continuous controversy. But that it is possible that this gland is an eye, that it does have enough structure to cause even a scientist to admit that it could possibly have visual power, but that this power is no longer active, but rudimentary traces of it can still be seen in reptilia even to the present time. All this adds up to one question. If this gland is an eye, is it likely, possible or reasonable, that nature preserves through the ages an eye that sees nothing? If a fish is left for a while in the cave of Kentucky or breeds there, after a few generations these fish are all blind because there is no light. And this type of thing has been observed everywhere. But this eye in the brain does not seem to thus deteriorate. It leaves us with a very interesting speculation. Obviously, this eye is not particularly useful in adding up grocery bills or other, what we might term, highly practical pursuits. But we do have a term which comes from somewhere, and we're not even too sure where it comes from, but it has gained popular acceptance through time, and that term is insight. Now, if we have any part of man's optical equipment that could possibly have a different function or a different purpose, to see something not otherwise visible, to see inward rather than outward things, to see qualitative rather than quantitative forms, to become aware, because our word see no longer simply means visual acceptance or visual reaction. When a man listens to what you say and he says, "I see what you mean," he is not looking at anything. It is insight that he is trying to tell you, that he has become aware. Descartes was convinced that this gland was a field of awareness, and that by its own proper nature it was aware of those things of which man is not normally aware, and that man actually, for all of his objective awareness, is utterly dependent upon the contribution of a kind of awareness which he does not even recognize or understand, an awareness inward into value. This kind of sight is a sight into principles, and it may also imply more things. It may imply a sight outside of the sensory range of the 5 sensory perceptions that we now know. It may represent a connection to a vibratory band which man is unable to recognize, know, or cognize in any other ordinary sensory perception. This would be quite reasonable and philosophically sound, because it is obvious that man must have some cognition beyond senses. If he does not have a cognition beyond senses, he is doomed to live and die in a sensory universe with no means of escape. This was not nature's intention. The individual, in order to be more than he is, must have an awareness greater than is commonly available to him. He may not call upon this awareness. He may not even know that it exists. But unless it does exist, a very subtle evolutionary process in the life of the individual is frustrated. There is no escape from what Buddha called the machine of the five senses. This machine is a squirrel cage. And no matter how much we use these five senses, or how skillfully we use them, we can never see anything except that which is outside of us and around us. And from the reaction to the things brought to our attention by the physical senses, we create the mental instrument. And the mental instrument, therefore, is absolutely locked in the processes of the sensory perceptions. Thus, man can never know more than his five senses report to him. He can never come to a conclusion more vast than their testimony. He can never escape from their tyranny, and he can never avoid or evade the inevitable pressure of their authority. Well, this actually cannot be true. Consequently, man must have some means of cognition which is beyond the sensory perceptions as we know them. This means of cognition could very easily and very well be associated with the comparatively rare phenomenon of what is termed extrasensory perception. Now, extrasensory perception as a term is again suffering from this tremendous determination to make everything scientific. Extrasensory perception today is being approached as glands were approached 25 years ago, as an interesting and wonderful possibility by means of which we hope ultimately to cure the common cold, prevent mumps, or do something of that nature. Again, it has no essential meaning unless by means of it we can learn to read our neighbor's bank book or something of that nature. It is a scientific curiosity, and science is now sitting around trying to figure how we can capitalize it, how we can make it profitable, how we can use it to raise the standard of living, or also indirectly to raise the cost of living, although that is what might be termed a concealed purpose. Extrasensory perception is not merely what we commonly think of when we read an article on ESP. Extrasensory perception is the same thing that has been recorded from the beginning of time in the visions of mystics, the strange psychic experiences of saints, the mysterious revelational factor referred to by Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas, another great church philosopher, did as much as he could within the boundary of the framework of his permitted thinking. In other words, there are things he could not do, because in his time men just did not do things that were contrary to their faith. It wasn't even a matter of persecution entirely. It was just simply that the human consciousness would not open itself to conscience reflexes by going outside of that which it regarded as right. Therefore, Aquinas was cramped a little in his philosophy and in his research. But he did recognize what he termed the validity of a sixth sense. We had the five ordinary senses, and he gave to us another sense, which he summarized in the concept of revelation. In other words, there was a way of